Look at what happens to our sinologists in our universities. Oh, yes. They are given all expense paid trips to Beijing and Shanghai, and they're given lavish dinners, and they're brought on the propaganda tour. Beijing is sending millions of dollars to our media. To the New York Times and the Washington Post have taken millions of dollars in order to publish standard Chinese communist propaganda. Marxism-Leninism is a Western import.
Oh, yes.
It has nothing to do with traditional Chinese culture.
Yeah.
And in my book, it is a complete continuation of the century of humiliation.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Freedom is Not Free and 新闻硬邦邦听新闻最爽 channels. My name is Stan, and today I'm in Washington, D.C. At the Institute of World Politics, one of the best graduate schools here in the area, with Dr. John Lenczowski, who is the founder of the IWP. Dr. Lenczowski, thank you so much for agreeing to take part in our show.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Stan.
First of all, let me tell you a little bit about John Lenczowski. He is a leading American national security scholar and the founder of and the president of the Institute of World Politics here in Washington, D.C. He served on the U.S. National Security Council during the Reagan administration as Director for European and Soviet Affairs. Dr. Lenczowski is widely recognized for his expertise on psychological warfare, disinformation, and the strategic use of ideas in great power competition. Today, through the IWP, he focuses on educating the next generation of leaders on how democracies can understand, deter, and ultimately prevail against authoritarian and totalitarian systems. And these lessons are very important to today's Taiwan. Dr. Lenczowski, for viewers who may not be familiar with it, could you please briefly explain the mission of the Institute of World Politics and how its focus on strategy, intelligence, and statecraft applies to today's great power competition?
Our mission can be summarized in one sentence. We are dedicated to developing leaders with a sound understanding of international realities, the ethical conduct of the different arts of statecraft, with knowledge and appreciation of America's founding principles and the Western, let's say, Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian moral tradition. We are dedicated to the defense of freedom and the defense of, obviously, America and Western civilization, but also what we call decent civilization wherever it is to be found around the world. And we've had we've had students from something like 60 different countries around the world. I don't know that we've ever had a Taiwanese student, which makes me very sad because Taiwan is one of those countries, and I call it a country, which has I have a very soft spot in my heart for Taiwan and its freedom. When we study international realities, what does that mean? It means the history, it means the different cultures. It means being able to understand the distinctions between different types of political systems, because different political systems behave differently in the world. I tell my students that there are carnivores and herbivores in the forest, and they each behave according to their nature.
Yes.
And it is in the nature of the carnivores to eat the herbivores, and the smart ones will try to convince the herbivores that they are herbivores too. And that is what's called strategic deception. And yet, unfortunately, in the free countries of the world, the study of deception is not a professional discipline in the national security and intelligence fields, strangely enough. If to take a baseball analogy, and I don't know to what extent your audience will understand this, but in baseball, the pitcher throws different kinds of pitches, fastballs, curveballs, knuckleballs that behave in different ways as the ball speeds towards the batter. And we want to teach our students about what all those curveballs, knuckleballs, and fastballs are, so that they know how to handle these things in the world. And one of the biggest problems that we try to overcome, it's a collection of problems. It is the impediments of seeing foreign reality correctly. Sometimes people engage in mirror imaging, where you look at others as if they're just like you, when they're not. So there is ideological utopianism, where people have really false ideas about what is possible in international affairs. There is disinformation, propaganda, strategic deception, perceptions management. None of the professional schools in the United States were studying these things. And how do you know you're perceiving foreign reality correctly if you don't know how propaganda works and the degree to which you have been propagandized and your perceptions have been shaped by masters at deception? Then there is corruption. Look at what happens to our sinologists in our universities. Oh, yes. They are given all expense paid trips to Beijing and Shanghai, and they're given lavish dinners, and they're brought on the propaganda tour. Beijing is sending millions of dollars to our media. To the New York Times and the Washington Post have taken millions of dollars in order to publish standard Chinese communist propaganda. And does that propaganda influence everybody? I don't know, but what really influences them is what those newspapers do not report about strategic developments from communist China that are inimical to the national security interests of the United States and our friends. And it's a terrible thing. Beijing has given money to and done joint projects with something like 7 of the major blue chip think tanks here in Washington and New York. This is corruption, okay? This is corruption. And that doesn't even count the corruption of our business community, so many members of whom are ready to sell their souls for a little extra money and sell out their country, frankly. One of our, the CEO of one of our major defense corporations came to assist the Chinese communists in how to do proper missile launches so that they could launch, credible missile attacks against the United States. This is unbelievable behavior.
And all the dual-use products that can be used in the military as well.
Exactly. And then, of course, so there are many of these impediments to seeing foreign reality correctly, but one of the worst is not an intellectual problem or a corruption problem. It's a moral problem. And the moral problem is wishful thinking, willful blindness, and the desire not to know. Because if you know, then maybe you have a moral or strategic obligation to do something about it. But, Alexander Solzhenitsyn called this the desire not to know. George Orwell called it the will to disbelieve the horrible. And it is fundamentally a moral problem where you do not have the moral courage to face up to reality, an ugly reality. Yeah. And this is a problem that I think is pandemic in our foreign policy community, and I think it exists in Taiwan as well. And I think that one of the greatest challenges is for people to face the truth and then act upon it. We have a faculty of scholar practitioners here at IWP. And oh, by the way, the second part of our mission, of course, is to teach the different arts of statecraft, the instruments of national power. We're the only school that has a curriculum architecture of this kind. And we're talking about the study of military strategy, traditional diplomacy, the many arts of public diplomacy, whether it is exchanges, visitors programs, information programs, international broadcasting, and then the harder edge of relations with an influence over foreign publics, such as political warfare, psychological strategy, ideological warfare, and this sort of thing. We teach intelligence. We started the first intelligence program, master's program outside the US government. We teach economic strategy, cyber strategy. All of these are like instruments in an orchestra. And you have to play your instrument well, but you have to know how it is integrated into the orchestra. And the conductor of the orchestra has to be aware of what and use all of the different sections of the orchestra. And we continually have conductors who do not use all these instruments of power. And so I like to say that our foreign policy culture all too often would rather drop a bomb on somebody's head rather than persuade him, because we don't. That's one of the fields where we completely neglect the special art of persuasion and of there's so many different aspects to it. You want to win friendly foreign publics, and you want then simultaneously to alienate them from tyrannical, aggressive regimes. And so anyway, we study political philosophy because I don't think you can defend a country that you neither understand nor appreciate.
Yes.
You can't defend a country you don't love, effectively at least. And then we study moral philosophy and applied ethics because, we're teaching the students power, how to use power. We want them to use it ethically, responsibly, and prudently, and raise the standard of moral leadership here in Washington and maybe in other corridors of the world.
And for the Taiwanese students, it will be very important to understand Taiwan's main ally, which is the United States. And unfortunately, as I know within the policy circles in Taiwan, with the media circles, with academia, there is still lack of understanding of American political culture, of tendencies and trends that are going on right now in the United States. So this is where IWP would be, as I see it, number one choice to study the United States and to learn more about its
we would love to have Taiwanese students here. I think it's really important for American students, as much as we Americans interact with the world, study the world, trade with the world, have alliance relationships around the world. We still have a certain kind of an insularity here. And it's really important for us to understand the perspectives of other cultures, and particularly the perspectives of our friends. And I think that they should understand us, and I think it's a very good investment for both sides to send students and to have our students not only study together, but make friendships when there is no agenda. And then 20 years later, when those students are in positions of high responsibility, sometimes those personal relationships can not only lubricate international relations, but end up solving problems without a lot of bureaucracy interfering in the process.
You have studied the Soviet Union extensively, and Chinese Communist Party, it's a communist party. China right now is a communist regime. What do you think are the main similarities between the former Soviet Union and modern China, particularly in information warfare, political influence, and long-term strategic thinking?
I think that there is a remarkable amount of similarity. Remarkable. All sorts of people say, well, China is different. They have this, they have Deng Xiaoping market reforms
economy, yeah.
and all of this. They said, I've never met a single communist when I've gone to do business in Beijing, they tell me, and my response to that is, there is nothing unorthodox about a communist general party secretary making so-called market reforms in order to boost the cause of communism. In the 19th century, one of the earliest communist-type revolutionaries, Nechayev, the author of the Revolutionary Catechism, said that if it is necessary to become a monarchist in order to defeat the monarchy, so this must be done. And of course, in the 1920s, Vladimir Lenin, is he an orthodox communist or not? Lenin himself, okay? Is he orthodox?
Oh, he also did market reforms.
He did
in the
market
Soviet
reforms.
Union. Yeah.
The so-called
The
new
new-
economic
yeah,
policy,
yeah.
the NEP. He restored a progressive tax rate. He permitted the peasants, and this is a 95% agricultural economy in the old Russia and Soviet Union, and so he would permit them to sell their crops and their livestock in the marketplaces, and keep a decent share of the fruits of their labors, and of course. In the Soviet Union, they never got rid of private property. They permitted people to have a half-acre private plot, which, according to Soviet statistics, those private plots were 40 times more productive than the collective farms. 40 times more productive, and that's Soviet statistics. They even revealed this, and of course. They didn't they didn't get rid of the private property of possessing chickens, and as my old friend Vladimir Bukovsky, one of the great Soviet dissidents, said, chickens are a notorious instrument of production, and so. Anyway,
but they didn't expropriate these means of
no,
production.
they didn't. No, they didn't. I had a young lady in my class one time who was an American Indian who had gone to the University of California at Berkeley, who was a communist. And in her communist enthusiasm, she went to China and lived there for 3 years. And at the end of this experience, and she was well embedded, she wasn't simply living in Tourlandia in China. She was well embedded into the rest, the heart of the country. And her experience caused her to cease to be a communist. She converted to Christianity and became a conservative. So she was in my class, and I was trying to explain to my normal sort of American students who had not had experience like this, some of the realities of communism, how you couldn't travel in the Soviet Union from one town to another without an internal passport and without 3 or 4 or 5 other documents all in order, your trade union card, your draft card, your residence card, your etc. After trying to explain this, and they thought that I was some kind of an extremist in a way describing these things, she started laughing. She was laughing, and it seemed very inappropriate. And so finally I looked over at her and I said, Julie, what are you laughing? And she said, everything that you say about the Soviet Union pertains exactly in China.
Yeah, they still
Everything.
have hukou. Like if you travel between the two cities and something happens to you, like a health issue, you cannot go to the hospital if you don't have the registration card of that city. And the rural hukous, like household registrations, are very different from the city hukous. So if you live in rural Sichuan and then you travel to Shanghai, you cannot move there with your kids because your kids cannot go to school in the city because they have the rural hukou.
There you go.
It's very discriminatory.
There you go.
Yeah.
This is life under communism, and there is pandemic ignorance about this in the United States. Nobody teaches this. We teach it to some degree here because, we have to teach these international realities. But when you have to teach someone intelligence and diplomacy and military strategy and all of these things, well, there are only so many hours in the day. And so anyway, I think that there are enormous similarities, and I think that there is also a very close similarity in strategic cultures. There's a book that was written called The Operational Code of the Politburo, written during the Cold War, and it is a series of maxims that come from Lenin and Stalin and Ponomaryov and all of these people about how to conduct how to use power for the sake of the revolution and for the expansion of communism in the world. And these principles essentially apply to communist China. The one thing that's a difference is that the Soviet Union had the Comintern. It had an entire network of communist parties, both ruling and non-ruling communist parties around the world, which it could use and did use very effectively as its agents in promoting revolution. China is integrated into the world communist movement, but it's not using it as much as the Soviet Union did because it has decided to use trade as the tip of the spear in the penetration of foreign countries and the corruption of business elites and the neutralization and the psychological disarmament of foreign leaders and business elites, which is been an extremely effective strategy.
We've been talking about the similarities between the Soviet Union and modern China. And where do you think these similarities fall apart, break down? And what are the critical differences in ideology, economic integration, or strategic patience that Western policymakers or maybe Taiwanese policymakers don't usually understand?
Well, the issue of trade is huge.
Okay.
I mean, and you know, the Soviet Union really had nothing to trade. They had four things: oil, gas, gold, and guns. That was it, and nobody wanted to buy anything else from the Soviet Union. China has been much cleverer in doing this, and I should not call it China. I should call it Communist China, because I make the distinction between the people and the nation on the one hand, and the party on the other. And the fact of the matter is that the party is the instrument that is running everything. They control the flow of capital and the priorities according to which it is allocated. If you want to do business, if you're in China, you have to be cozy enough with the party in order to get access to that capital. I do not like to use the expression PLA, the People's Liberation Army, because that is repeating a lie. I do not like to repeat lies.
They've never liberated anyone.
It's not. They haven't
They've
liberated
subjugated
anybody.
many people,
Right. It is slavery. Communism is slavery, and except for those in the privileged elite. But nevertheless, they are slaves in a certain way. They're slaves to the party, and they have to go along with the drumbeat. Now here the ideology. You mentioned ideology. The ideology is effectively the same. Effectively the same. They call it, this is Marxism-Leninism with Chinese characteristics. Excuse me, what's the ideology for? What's it there for? Well, it is partly, a theory of knowledge, a theory of history, a theory of politics and economics and of social change and historical change, but it's there to legitimize the regime. It is the only reason that they can give why they deserve to be in power. They try auxiliary instruments of legitimacy like, we've built up this big economy and we've saved the country with our fantastic economic policies. Well, not for 1 billion people in China, they haven't, who live hard-scrabbled, dirt-poor lives in the countryside and can't do all sorts of things that the elites want to do. But perhaps the most important thing about the ideology, and of course as a legitimizing instrument it's extremely weak because it is a tissue of lies, and it is easily refutable. I mean, it is easily refutable, and it's amazing that they should cling to it, but they have to, because there is no other reason why they deserve to be in power. Why do they deserve to be in power? What is the legitimizing principle under Marxism-Leninism? Well, it is the idea that it's a Gnostic idea that they understand the laws of history better than anybody else. And therefore, by understanding those laws of history, they can help guide the wave of history in a way that will optimize the benefits of society. They have this esoteric knowledge, which is the characteristic of Gnosticism. And of course, that's another way of saying, you know, we're smarter than you, and therefore we deserve to be in power. But you know, who gives them the right to say these things? No, they rule without the consent of the governed. They are fundamentally an illegitimate regime, and they don't even have a sliver of the kind of legitimacy that, let's say, a king may have of one of these Middle Eastern monarchies, where the king or the tribal chieftain, let's say, in an African country or other tribes, the authority that they exercise, which is done effectively with the help of custom, where there is a tradition and a custom within a culture to accept that there has to be some kind of hierarchical authority, and that it is logical that there should be a tribal chieftain or an emir or a king or something like that. There's partial legitimacy in that because custom and tradition incorporate a certain level of consent of the governed. But there's no such thing under communism. But the most important thing perhaps about, and next to that, about ideology is what is the other major function. It sets the standard of political conformity. It sets the standard against which deviationism is measured. It is the drum beating for soldiers marching. And the reason soldiers march is to get rid of their independence, to get rid of their, their independence of mind, their voluntaristic tendencies. And so if you do not march according to the drum beat, you can be identified by the sergeant and taken away and disciplined. And this is, and so you combine the ideological party line with the party's monopoly of communications and information, and you've got a lockhold on society, assuming, of course, you've got your secret police and the Lao guy. You know, then it all works together very well.
Many of the Chinese dissidents are characterizing the communist regime as the new dynasty, a new imperial dynasty, and they're saying that it looks like secret police. There was secret police during the Qing dynasty time, and as for example, Qing was they were Manchus, they were not even Han Chinese, and with Yuans they were Mongols, they were not Han Chinese as well, and they were they were portraying the communist regime as the new dynasty. What do you think about this framing, saying that they are just a different imperial dynasty?
Yeah, I think it's preposterous. I think it's preposterous. This is totalitarianism. And there may have been authoritarian rule, and you know, there are plenty of authoritarians who have their security police. The Shah of Iran had his security police, and yet it was a remarkably liberal country. Yeah. He sent all kinds of people to study abroad. You could set up a business, you could worship, you could, the only thing you couldn't do was try to overthrow the Shah. Yeah. Okay, well, you know, China is not a free country. Communist China is not a free country, and so there are huge distinctions between this, and I think it's fanciful propaganda that they would like to do because it's part of part of the CCP's propaganda to show that they are the inheritors and the protectors of the nation. They are trying to identify themselves with the nation when in fact they are the subjugators of the nation. And by the way, Marxism-Leninism is a Western import.
Oh, yes.
It has nothing to do with traditional Chinese culture. Yeah. And in my book, it is a complete continuation of the century of humiliation. Yeah. The Western ideology of Marxism-Leninism continues the humiliation of the Chinese nation.
Yeah. And the Communist Party is responsible for basically the destruction of so many cultural artifacts, of cultural standards, of philosophy, of everything. They destroyed the Chinese culture during the Cultural Revolution. And based on Cold War experience, let's talk a little bit about Taiwan. What do you think Taiwan should prioritize to protect itself, not only militarily, but also psychologically, politically, and societally against the CCP's pressure? Because the issue of propaganda is, it's a very hot topic right now in Taiwan, and people are trying to find a way to stop being influenced as much, for example, by Chinese social media apps, but still sometimes society resists if the government wants to, for example, ban a Chinese social media app. Like a couple of months ago, Taiwanese government has banned Xiaohongshu. The reason was there were too many fraudulent accounts there, and they've banned it for 1 year, but still apps like TikTok, like Kuaishou, they're still widely available in Taiwan. What do you think Taiwan should do to protect itself from the ideological influence from the CCP?
The most important thing that can be done is tell the truth. The truth is the most powerful weapon. Communism depends for its internal rule and for its external policy, its foreign policy, upon lies. It's essential. It's essential to the success of their domestic rule and their foreign policy. And so the truth is the most powerful weapon that free people can use. And it has to be told by the national leaders. They have to tell the truth about the nature of communism, the nature of the Chinese communist regime, about the nature of the threat, how the threat is not only military, which it is, with its constant harassment, gray zone aggression. Let's call it what it is, gray zone aggression. It's espionage, it's technology theft, and it's overt and covert strategic influence operations inside the country. And the entire, the articulation and the documentation of every element of this threat needs to be articulated by the leaders of Taiwan, and if they don't have the courage to do it, there have to be private institutions, academic institutions, think tanks, opposition politicians who are constantly telling that truth, because as Solzhenitsyn said, the one word of truth outweighs the world. And you know, Ronald Reagan came into office telling the truth. He told the truth about the Soviet threat, about the Soviet military buildup. He gave a nationwide television address where he had graphs in front of, he would show the graph in front of everybody, and this is the Soviet arsenal, and here's the American arsenal, smaller. Here is the trend line of Soviet military equipment. Here is the trend line of American military equipment. We must redress this. He gave the facts. He called them, he said in his first press conference, they will lie, they will cheat, they will commit any crime to promote the goals of communism, and the bien-pensants, the right-thinking people here, the respectable people here in Washington were all completely outraged. As Bukovsky, the Soviet dissident, said, American Sovietologists would rather be moderate than correct. And so he said, then Reagan said, they have a different morality than we do. And he is precisely correct. If you want to know what communist morality is, read Lenin's speech to the youth leagues of 1920. And in the second half of that speech, there is the distillation of communist morality, where he said, there are no such things as objective moral standards. That is a bourgeois prejudice. What is good is that which helps the revolution and the party, of course, and what is bad is what hinders the party and the revolution. And it's right there in that speech. And of course, for decades in the Soviet Union, every school child had to read that speech. I think that in Taiwan, people ought to read that speech and come to grips with the nature of the beast that's across the Taiwan Strait from them. And telling the truth is the prerequisite, because everything else follows from that. Needless to say, there needs to be military deterrence. And let's watch what's happening in the Ukraine war today. The number 3 army in the world, the Russian army, has been put to a standstill by the number 23 army in the world of Ukraine. How do you like that? I think that Taiwan can do the same thing to China, and if it had the support of Japan, of the United States, of Australia, and other friends, in the region, the Philippines, for goodness sake, Taiwan will remain a free country. But Taiwan needs to shore up those alliances to the best of its ability. I think that Taiwan needs to decouple itself economically from Communist China. Communist China has been stealing our and Taiwan's intellectual property.
Yes.
It has been influencing and corrupting people all along the way, and the business elites that are making money at the expense of the national interest cannot be the ones dominating Taiwanese foreign policy. They simply cannot be. If Taiwan wants to be a free country, these people will be rich, and then they'll die, and they don't care what happens in the future. Okay? That's the attitude of those kinds of people, and they should be identified as such. There's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with getting rich. But don't do it at the expense of your neighbor, of your family, of your children, your grandchildren, and everybody else in the society. I'm sorry. They should feel guilty about doing this.
Yes, absolutely.
This is a... And I'm not just talking about Taiwanese business elites, I'm talking about American business elites, so many of whom, frankly, make me sick when I look and see their behavior.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lenczowski. And the final question would be, if you were advising Taiwan today, what would you say is the single most important lesson from the Cold War for deterring a communist adversary? Well,
one, I mentioned telling the truth.
Yeah.
I mentioned telling the truth. But what is really the importance? The telling the truth does a couple of things. It builds up a pro-defense consensus in your country. That's one thing that it does, and it's absolutely necessary, because then that means you have your military buildup, you have a sound economic policy, and so on and so forth. And it also, but it also bolsters your political ideological strength. Taiwan needs to understand and the Taiwanese people need to understand what are the sinews, what is the soul of a free country. And why do we want freedom? Because we want human beings to realize the fullest of their God-given potential. That's what. We want them to invent new and wonderful things. We want them to compose new and beautiful music. We want them to create wonderful art. And you can't do that under communism. Why did some of the greatest ballet dancers in the world flee from the Soviet Union? Because even though they had certain kind of good ballet in a certain way, people like Baryshnikov fled because there was no room for creativity. There was no room for creativity. The human spirit is imprisoned under totalitarian rule, and so we want freedom, but you have to understand what it is and where it comes from. You have to understand that there's a relationship between freedom and virtue. You have to. the founding fathers of our country said that you cannot be a self-governing people, a genuinely free people, unless you can control yourselves. You have to have self-control, because genuine freedom is actually freedom from the slave, not only from external slavery, but freedom from the slavery of your own vices. And so there's a relationship between virtue and genuine freedom, but then when you understand what the foundations of a free society are, you can come to love that society. You can come you can recognize that human beings are imperfect, that we will never escape the temptation to do the wrong thing. We'll never escape that.
Yeah.
That's part of human life, and people will succumb to that temptation. One of the greatest things about American constitutional order is that our founders created a system designed to protect the society from the inevitable evils that we will see from people in high places in government who have succumbed to the temptation to do the wrong thing. And this is a brilliant system. It's a genius system.
That's why the checks and balances.
Checks and balances, and the diffusion of power. It's not all centered here in Washington. You have federal government power, you have the power in the states, and then you have power in the localities. And the federal government cannot tell me whether I'm going to have a stop sign on my street or a speed bump or something like that. That's the matter for local government. And then, of course, there's the separation of powers, executive, legislative, judicial, and checks and balances, and a rule of law that is higher than the people who are in power, and so on. So understanding what a free society is all about and what the proper structures are to protect freedom can bring you to understand that this is something worth defending. And now if you have to risk your life for something, you're going to risk your life for something that you don't understand, or that you think is a dubious proposition. Communist propaganda in the United States is teaching our students in high schools and colleges to hate their country, and to hate their parents too. Yeah. And that's what communist propaganda is doing here in America. And it is a long twilight struggle to try to overcome that kind of, inculcated alienation which people on the left in this country are trying to do. And I don't know the extent to which this is going on in Taiwan, but the point is that people have to have the will to defend what is rare and precious about their society. And Taiwan has a rare and precious society. It's a democracy. It's consent of the governed. It's a free country. And this is very rare and precious in human history. Taiwanese people have to understand this. And then when you do, and you have this commitment to a cause that's higher than your own selfish pleasures, then you're sending a signal of will, as a signal of strength. Because will to defend when communists do something, the Soviet Union had a thing called the correlation of forces. They would study military strength, economic strength, scientific and technical strength, political strength, and all sorts of things. But one of the things they studied was political, ideological, cultural strength. It's an intangible. You can't count it. But the Soviets could see it in Ronald Reagan because he had the courage to tell the truth rather than censor himself. His predecessors were all censoring themselves in the interest of peace and quiet, of détente. Well, all you have to, when Ronald Reagan started telling the truth, the number one priority of Soviet foreign policy was to get him to shut up.
Yeah.
And so, when you start censoring yourself, you are Finlandized, to use an expression with all due respect to the Finns who have a proud tradition of resistance to totalitarian aggression. But the fact was that during the Cold War, they maintained their independence amazingly, but they had to censor themselves. And the Soviet Union had a veto power over their speech and over their foreign policy. And unfortunately, we had a lot of American presidents who lived under the illusion that if they censored themselves and were nice and polite to the sensitivities of the likes of Leonid Brezhnev, that there would be genuine peace. Excuse me, this is a false peace. This is the false atmospherics of peace and not genuine peace. And as the great Russian scientist, inventor of the Soviet H-bomb, and dissident Sakharov said to the Kremlin, he said, "You will never have peace with the West until you have peace with your own people. And peace with your own people is respecting their human rights. So let's not have any illusions about the Beijing communists. They do not have peace with their own people. The central fact of political life in China today is regime's fear of its own people and fear of democratic ideas. And so when it comes to the conduct of ideological warfare, the promotion of democracy, the bearing witness to human rights violations, solidarity between the Taiwanese people and the Chinese people, not the regime, the Chinese people. This is political ideological warfare, to support the people. President Trump talks about making deals with all sorts of people. Maybe a deal with Xi Jinping. Why? I would suggest that he consider making a deal with the Chinese people. So I think that telling the truth, bearing moral witness, building up your strength in every category, but the most important thing is moral, political, spiritual, cultural strength, which signals a will to resist. And when they see that strength, that's a different thing. When we, and of course cultural strength and cultural health is part of all of this, moral cultural health. Osama bin Laden and his confederates in Al-Qaeda came to the conclusion that America was a morally rotten country, and that we were just simply a bunch of selfish hedonists with our pornography society and all of that. Well, he was half right, but that was sending us, that signal of our culture was sending a signal of weakness, of what we call here provocative weakness to him. And he said, this is the time to attack. And that's what he did. Well, he was only half right, because there are still serious people here who taught him a lesson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lenczowski.
You're welcome.
And thanks everyone for watching.